Jerusalem and the trip of a lifetime, and the perspective that comes from visiting the Holy Land. Well, Justin and I had our last meal in the United States in the Chicago O'Hare Airport. It was Big Macs at McDonald's. Final taste of home before we left. 30 hours from the time that we left Orlando, we arrived in Jerusalem. The long journey amplified our first impressions of the city, even though we were only seeing the lights in the dark. You see the gold dome there, the Dome of the Rock visible from our perch on Mount Scopus. But the next morning brought refreshed bodies and a renewed spirit. We once again sought high ground for a good position from which to see the city. This time, it was from the Mount of Olives. As I read this passage, look at the panoramic view of Jerusalem, and you may begin to capture some of the perspective that Jesus encountered on his final visit to the city before the crucifixion. From Psalms chapter 122, I'll read verses 1 through 9. I was glad when they said unto me, Let us go into the house of the Lord. Our feet shall stand within thy gates, O Jerusalem. Jerusalem is builded as a city that is compact together, whither the tribes go up, the tribes of the Lord, unto the testimony of Israel, to give thanks unto the name of the Lord. For there are set thrones of judgment, and the thrones of the house of David. Pray for the peace of Jerusalem. They shall prosper that love thee. Peace be within thy walls, and prosperity within thy palaces. For my brethren and companions' sakes, I will now say, Peace be within thee. Because of the house of the Lord our God, I will seek thy good. As you look at the city, you notice that there is a wall surrounding the city. Was that the wall of the city during Jesus' day? No, it is not the wall that was the wall around Jesus' day. The wall that you see now is only 400 years old. It was built by the Turks when they controlled Jerusalem. Fortunately, some very dedicated archaeologists have built a 1/50th scale model of Jerusalem one moment before the Romans destroyed the city in 70 AD. So we can get an idea of what Jerusalem looked like during the days of Christ. We can overlay pictures of the current city with pictures of the scale model and get a clearer idea of what Jerusalem looked like at the time of Christ. The walled gate to the right of the gold dome is called the Eastern Gate. It is not the original gate or position of the original gate, but the name Eastern Gate has been transferred to this location. The original position no longer exists. As you can see from the picture of the model, the original Eastern Gate led pilgrims directly up to the temple. And you can clearly see that a Muslim shrine currently rests on the site of the second temple. This second temple was built by Herod the Great on the site where Solomon's temple had originally been built. But before we get to the temple, let's return to our perch on the Mount of Olives. The Garden of Gethsemane is up on the Mount of Olives, just east of Jerusalem, across the Kidron Valley, and there are hundreds of olive trees still to this day. The area is hilly, and there are several natural caves and knolls that would provide excellent shelter. If you went there 2,000 years ago and you had to stay at the KOA campground, it would have been located on the Mount of Olives. It's easy to imagine visitors to Jerusalem going into the city by day and then camping on the hillside at night, there on the Mount of Olives. The church pictured here simply is a marker that identifies these hills as the Mount of Olives in the Garden of Gethsemane. Further up the hill, there's a small chapel that marks the place where Christ ascended up to heaven. Was it right there? No one knows. The important thing is that Christ did ascend up into heaven. Turning our gaze back down toward the city once again, let's try to imagine the old city of Jerusalem. You definitely have to use your imagination, because the truth is, the old city of Jerusalem was actually outside the walls of what we call the old city of Jerusalem. This picture looking toward Jerusalem from the south gives you a better idea of the size of the original city of Jerusalem. It was south of where the current city is. On the right side, you can see the Kidron Valley. At its base, which is covered by years of civilization, was the original spring which provided water for the city. And from the north and west, you have the Valley of Kirapon, which established the original western boundary of the city. Now, where the gold dome is, you can probably just barely see. That now is where the north of the city was in that time. And so where it is now is part of the territory that was controlled by the Jebusites. Now, since it's straight ahead of us, let's proceed on to the Temple Mount. Keep in mind the significance of this place is not due to the buildings that have been erected here. In fact, the buildings detract from the real reason you should want to come to this place. To get perspective, let's return to the Scriptures. And I invite you to turn all the way back to the beginning of the Old Testament, to the book of Genesis. Go to Genesis in chapter 22, and let's look at verses 1 through 14 together. And it came to pass after these things that God did tempt Abraham, and said unto him, Abraham, and he said, Behold, here I am. And he said, Take now thy son, thine only son Isaac, whom thou lovest, and get thee into the land of Moriah, and offer him there for a burnt offering upon one of the mountains which I will tell thee of. And Abraham rose up early in the morning, and saddled his ass, and took 2 of his young men with him, and Isaac his son, and clave the wood for the burnt offering, and rose up, and went unto the place of which God had told him. Then on the 3rd day Abraham lifted up his eyes, and saw the place afar off. Then drop down to verse number 7. And Isaac spake unto Abraham his father, and said, My father. And he said, Here am I, my son. And he said, Behold the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for a burnt offering? Verse 8. And Abraham said, My son, God will provide himself a lamb for a burnt offering. So they went both of them together. And they came to the place which God had told him of. And Abraham built an altar there, and laid the wood in order, and bound Isaac his son, and laid him on the altar upon the wood. And Abraham stretched forth his hand, and took the knife to slay his son. And the angel of the Lord called unto him out of heaven, and said, Abraham, Abraham. And he said, Here am I. And he said, Lay not thine hand upon the lad, neither do thou anything unto him. For now I know that thou fearest God, seeing thou hast not withheld thy son, thine only son, from me. And Abraham lifted up his eyes, and looked, and behold, behind him a ram caught in a thicket by his horns. And Abraham went and took the ram, and offered him up for a burnt offering in the stead of his son. And Abraham called the name of that place Jehovah-Jireh, as it is said to this day, In the mount of the Lord it shall be seen. See, Abraham was the only person who could ever say that he related to what God went through when he sacrificed his only son. Have you ever been guilty of saying that to someone? I know exactly how you feel. You can't possibly know exactly how someone feels. But for Abraham, that was actually the truth. He's the only one that could ever say to God, I know exactly how it feels to come to the place to offer up your only son. So, did he do it? He didn't actually do it. Abraham didn't have to kill his son, but he was willing to, and in his mind and his heart, he had already given up Isaac. You know, Romans 4